Good evening and welcome to the meditation course part 4. And this is the final in this 4-part series. This meditation belongs to a practice called Raj Yoga and is a central part of this practice in that it allows us to reconnect to cultivate and to empower a spiritual awareness. And we understand that this spiritual awareness, this awareness in which I understand and I experience myself to be a soul and not this body. This is my body, but it's not me. It's the vehicle, the instrument, the costume that I wear, and I, the soul, the spiritual being, sit here in the driver's seat of the throne of the forehead. And so we've been exploring in these 3 sessions, the 3 previous sessions, how powerful that spiritual awareness is and how it is the true, if you will, alignment for the being. Just as a true alignment for the body increases and enhances the mobility, the stability, the structural integrity of the body, so this spiritual consciousness and cultivating it is incredibly, it's basically the foundation for the health and well-being of I, the soul. And so today, what we'd like to, or this evening, or whenever you're actually watching this, because of course it could be at any time, but what we'll be looking at is a little bit more discovering and experiencing who and what and how I am, I, this soul, this spiritual being, and also how I can support sustaining that spiritual consciousness, that spiritual alignment, which can slip away so easily as soon as I get caught up in the business of living. And so we want to cultivate this consciousness because it elevates the quality of everything that is the, if you will, this consciousness is the source for. This consciousness which I am, this energy of consciousness which I am and which I have, is the source of everything that makes living possible. It's the source of all my thinking, my feelings, my attitude, my perceptions, my beliefs. It's even where all my memories are recorded. It's the energy that animates this body, that keeps it alive. And all of these activities, if you will, these dynamics are happening naturally, automatically. But it's the quality of all of those activities that determines the quality of my life. And within that, the peace, that inner contentment, that fulfillment I experience, and the ultimate, the happiness. That is the indicator. I mean, even now they have something called a happiness index, because they're looking at that as actually the true indicator of quality of life. Not how much I have physically in terms of possessions, but in fact, how great is my ability to sustain a state of happiness. And of course, if my happiness is dependent on everything outside of myself, everything on which I have absolutely no control, I'm kind of waiting for the universe to give me happiness rather than actively, proactively ensuring it, sustaining it, manifesting it, creating it myself. And so it's empowering, it's this incredible gift to awaken to this reality, if you will, this spiritual truth of the self, that I am a soul, and this is my body, and the two are distinct and separate, and yet together, that's a human being. And so it's not that I become what we call soul conscious so I can separate from my body and know true fulfillment. Of course not. When a soul separates from the body, it's called death, and so it's not exactly very useful. But the idea is that through understanding who I am and having that clear, if you will, anchor and foundation, I can start to use these resources, of which the body is a huge one, it's precious. But I can use them in a really useful and beneficial way. Because happiness and sorrow are in our hands. Yes, we can look to others for happiness, or we can blame others or situations for our sorrow. But one of the things I've learned, and I learned very early on in my life, is there's no one that can cause me as much sorrow as myself. And there's also no one who can really give me the greatest happiness but myself. I think that second statement is only something I came to understand through pursuing this practice. Because I think before that, I was not, if you will, in the position to actively and independently be the source of my happiness. And yet, in fact, that is what is going on at every moment in our lives. We are the source of our happiness and we're the source of our sorrow. And so ultimately, if I can start to become the master of that, this is incredibly powerful and useful. So before we go any further, one of the things that we do within this study is we take the time before really pursuing or exploring spiritual aspects by first positioning ourselves in that consciousness of a spiritual being, understanding that that's the most, if you will, that's the awareness or state in which I have the greatest clarity and capacity to understand and implement these spiritual truths. By first positioning myself in that fundamental spiritual truth, that I'm a soul. So let's do that right now. And once again, we're going to benefit, if you will, from this wonderful marriage of body and soul, the fact that the two are constantly in constant exchange, and of course one impacts the other at every moment. And so rather than feeling that that's a problem, we're actually going to use it to help ourselves get into that awareness of soul. And so we've talked about the fact that the alignment of the body plays a big factor on the quality of movement. And so the spiritual alignment, that spiritual consciousness is what plays a big impact on the quality of that consciousness, which then determines the quality of everything I generate. So we'll start by first, let's get the body in its ideal alignment, or as close to it as is possible at this time. And so once again, your feet hopefully are flat on the floor. If you're sitting cross-legged, that's fine too. We can sort of play with that as well. But as I'm sitting in a chair, I've got my feet on the floor flat. My legs are parallel, toes pointing forward. And everything we're about to do, it is I, the spiritual being, with the power of my natural innate capacity of awareness, that I'm going to use that power to help position my body. So I'm feeling where my body is. I want to feel that my heels are under my knees. And so now in this position, I'm just going to simply see where is my body at right now, because it's helpful to know where do I usually end up. And perhaps observing that most powerful indicator of if the alignment's where I want it to be or not, the breath. If I observe it, where is that breath happening? Probably for most of us, it'll be happening from the midline down into the belly. And of course, ideally, we want that breath to be happening from the midline or diaphragm, the lower rib borders, up into the chest where those lungs actually are. Yeah, our lungs are not on our bellies, so the lungs and the ribs have been designed for movement. So let's see if we can get the movement happening there. So we always want to have the shoulder blades, unless we're sitting away from the back of the chair. But if you've got, and if you can put your back against the chair, so you're actually taking the support of the back of the chair, I want you to very gently get your shoulder blades by rocking the ribcage up until the shoulder blades are against the chair. They should be at all times. When we're driving, whatever we're doing, we should position, or at least be using a chair that we can do that in. So the angle, if we can adjust it so that we can get the shoulder blades there comfortably. Once the shoulder blades are there, we're now going to do a little trick, if you will, something to help position the pelvis and activate the core muscles. And so what I'd like you to do is put on those imaginary strings on the knees and start to gently pull with the power of your awareness, your mind. Pull those strings gently upwards to lighten the weight of the feet on the floor. They still rest against the floor, but they're getting a little lighter. And you're going to feel the pelvis get heavier and sink into the chair. And all the while, I am observing, experiencing I, the spiritual being. And what that's going to do is your pelvis might rock slightly forward, so it's getting more on top of the sits bones, those bones that we feel when we sit on a hard surface. And activate the abdominal muscles, the lower abdominal muscles, perhaps muscles in the back of the pelvis at the level of where you might have those sometimes dimples in the back at the sacrum, the joint there. We might even feel muscles activating a little bit in the groin area. The spine begins to elongate as the diaphragm becomes free and starts to open. The ribs start to open, almost like an umbrella. And of course, as that umbrella opens, it lifts to help lift the spine and the head floating on top. Also, what happens as the pelvis properly is positioned, it actually helps to pull the head back into alignment. Because, of course, the computer, the devices, driving, living, has basically put us here with the head projecting forward. And that can have a huge impact on the health of the neck, what's going on in the voice, all sorts of things. And so, activate. So we're still pulling gently up on those knees, so we're reinforcing all of those postural muscles, those support muscles in the lower back, lower abdominal area. And if we focus now on where is the breath, it's like, where's Waldo? Where's the breath? Ah, it's in my rib cage. Wonderful. Now, using the power of your awareness, so you see, when we pay attention, that's the only way we can start to sustain. When we kind of get distracted and our attention wanders off, things can fall apart and we have no idea. So I'm going to use the power of my awareness, the power of my consciousness, to sustain where the bones of my body are now positioned, this alignment, as I very slowly release the strings, feeling the feet settle down into the floor, feeling the shoulder blades maybe sink a little bit more into the back of the chair. But I've kept the position of the pelvis, kept the gentle openness of the ribs, and again the breath moving gently in the rib cage. So it's like a little warm-up for our consciousness to manage all of this. Yeah, because we're not looking with our eyes to check. A lot of the things that are happening, we can't see them anyway. Yeah, just like in a spiritual practice, a lot of the things you're doing, you can't see them. A lot of things that I'm doing even with this body, even though the body is visible, the inner workings are not visible, but we can experience them. And as my mind, as my awareness is managing, is observing, I'm helping to reinforce and to amplify that capacity of awareness. Because it gets quite diminished because most of the time we are unaware. And so we've just done this little exercise that has, of course, been extremely beneficial for the body as it's now moved into more of its ideal alignment, more ideal breath. And as I relax or, allow the body to stay in that alignment, but to kind of settle a little bit, so I'm not holding it there. I'm allowing the weight of it to sink into the chair, but maintaining that freedom in the rib cage, that support in the lower body. And now bringing my awareness upwards. Matter of fact, it almost is pulled naturally to its source, which we know is the center of the forehead. That's where I sit the driver's seat of this body. But I want to just also have a feeling of centering in my drishti, which as mentioned before, is that energy of seeing. Imagine it like a subtle energy just in front of the eyes that actually radiates far beyond the eyes. But that's where I can sense it. It's a very subtle energy, and so I position myself in it very gently with a lightness, the lightness of a subtle being, which is me. Understanding that that subtle energy is radiating, generated by me, the being. And just by centering myself there, or positioning myself there, my awareness, my attention, naturally I become centered, center of the forehead. Sometimes I think of it as like a triangulation. Yeah, the two eyes automatically put me in the position of the third eye, which is me, in fact, the real I, I, the spiritual being. We sometimes say the third eye because now it's open, meaning I'm awake and aware to this spiritual truth of who and what I am. And my own attention is feeding that truth. And just by being in this position, just as when the alignment is right, so many capacities, this power is accessed in the body, just by positioning myself, I could say where I sit, but also with the understanding of what and who I'm positioning my attention on. I access the innate capacities of that being. I can begin to sense them. And even by knowing what they are, I invoke them, they become more amplified, they present themselves. It's like you call them to become present. Because they exist, but just the power of my attention, being aware of them, can allow them to rise to the surface and present themselves, reveal themselves to me. And what are those innate qualities? Well, the fundamental quality that I feel almost immediately as I position myself in this truth is peace. A deep inner silence, a sweet silence. As that tension, that noise of all that is false, all that is acquired falls away. The peace of being immune to all of that past baggage just is put aside. It no longer has a hold or an influence on me when I'm in this awareness. That silence, that freedom, peace, purity. So peace is one, purity is another. That pure state in which nothing foreign is mixed in. That pristine quality of energy, a state of health, well-being, in which I function at my most ideal, highest level, purity. And then this feeling of kindness, compassion, love. Love is another quality that is innate to me in my true alignment. Just this natural generating of pure feelings, good wishes, benevolence, love. Power. I am power and I have power. But again, it's a pure power. Power that can only give and only do that which is beneficial. Power. We need power. Everybody needs power. There's nothing as, if you will, painful or as unsatisfying as being powerless. And so we are and we have power. A very elevated quality of power. Truth. When so many quality, or so many, if you will, aspects connected to that quality of truth, clarity, honesty, just a state in which I'm transparent and in which everything that comes from me is accurate. It's a treasure, truth. It's attractive to us. Authenticity, another way of saying it, to be authentic, invaluable. We value it in others, and we certainly desire it in ourselves. And so truth, another quality. Bliss, which always sounds so kind of beyond, but it's ultimately a state of complete contentment, and a contentment that is benevolent. So it's not, I'm just content and smug in my own contentment. I'm fine regardless of anyone else. But it's a state of contentment, of completion, which allows me to be completely benevolent. So it's like I feel blessed, and I become a blessing for everything and everyone. A state of bliss. And then, last quality, harmony or balance. A state of wellness. Balance is wellness, health. And so, just as in the body, when it is properly aligned, the muscles work in balance. And that means health for the movement, healthy movement. When the alignment is wrong, muscles start to work in imbalance. And how do I eventually know that? Either sooner or later, there is pain. So how important that balance is for happiness. Sometimes we include happiness, although it's probably merged in bliss somewhere. So again, these qualities, peace, purity, love, power, truth, bliss, and balance or harmony. And so when I sit when I'm practicing this meditation of using my awareness, using these spiritual truths, the pure thoughts that I create from them, to bring me, to drive me into the position and into an experience of my true self. And then in that silence, in that freedom from all that has been acquired, I can begin to taste and to experience these innate qualities, these capacities that I possess, that belong to me. And, this energy, the quality of it, to sustain that, just to think what kind of life that would enable me to live. And so this is the nature of Raj Yoga. This is what we are looking to, not just to cultivate when we're sitting, but to be able to get up and start to move and interact and live our lives from this awareness. But of course, there's all of that acquired. What do we do about that? And that was, as was mentioned towards the end of the previous session, was going to be a main focus point today. How do I sustain this, this state of freedom, ultimate freedom? Freedom from the past, freedom from a programming that has clearly gone sideways. And we see that because if you ever find yourself thinking, feeling, saying, or doing anything that afterwards you wonder why you did that, or why you are continuing to do that, or you regret it, that just indicates I'm not in a state of mastery over my own functioning, over what goes on in my head. I mean, I became very good realizing early on in my life that, there was a little bit of interesting stuff going on in there. But at least let me be able to control it to the point that it doesn't go out there. Now, I can't say I was 100% successful in that, but I developed a pretty good capacity to, let's say, do a good cover-up job, and to at least not allow all of it to come out and present itself in the world. And yeah, it was my ego that clearly did not want whatever darkness was inside to be visible to everyone else. But it didn't mean that, I still had to live with it 24/7. And these are the things that don't allow us to experience that peace and happiness in our lives. When we know that, and not just know that there's stuff going on in there that isn't ideal, but even beyond that, to feel there's something better in there. Why? How do I get that to start to be what's driving everything I do? And so to just manipulate yourself, to, if you will, live from the outside in, to just try and control your expression, is very violent, and it takes an incredible amount of energy. You can get to the end of your day and think, why am I so exhausted? I didn't really do a lot today. There wasn't, it's not like I ran a marathon or anything, but I just feel exhausted. And of course, the amount of energy that we're doing just to try and control ourselves, to, not let, if you will, that little devil out, it's draining. And rather than that, to not just stop the drain of energy, but actually start to fill the self with energy through the quality of my actions. What a difference that would be. And so I've got to do something about what's happened to me. Yeah, sometimes when things have happened to the body, it's not just enough for me. Okay, now I've got the alignment, I know what to do. But I'm realizing how if there's been injury, if I've been, it's been so long that I've been stuck in the wrong place, that it's now very difficult to come out. Plus, as the body starts to adjust, there can be, discomfort as it swings from one extreme to the next sometimes. It's a whole process. Within that, how can I move through it, if you will, gracefully? I'm going to need some help. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of help that I did get. My body did get injured at a certain point. I had to actually stop dancing at that point and realize finally my ego was able to kind of, or let's say I could bypass ego enough to realize I need to get help. And I found some really great people and disciplines that were able to help my body finally get to a place of health, of well-being, or wellness, well-being. Wellness, I guess, is a better way of saying it. And so for the soul, this invisible point of energy, conscious living energy, where do I go to help that? And how do I help something that's invisible? We did look at last week the subtle organs, if you will, or faculties of the soul, that there's this mind, and we're not talking about something, a function of the brain, but this energy of the consciousness in which, if you will, it's more at the surface of that energy where I can be conscious of what's going on in me, the things I'm thinking, the thoughts I'm having, the feelings. These reveal a lot of where the energy, the consciousness is at. And then that deeper level of consciousness, the intellect, which is like the muscles of the soul, where there's discernment, understanding, recognition, all of these kinds of workings are going on. And determining, kind of assessing what's going on at the surface there and deciding if something needs to be kind of changed or adapted there, if things are actually operating as they should, So we've got the indicators showing up on the mind. Is the intellect in any position to do something if it's not ideal what's going on there? Is it even aware of what's going on there? Is the intellect completely asleep? Has it become very weak? And so this practice, part of that is to empower it with spiritual truths. These help to, if you will, calibrate it or configure it properly so it starts to function properly. It starts to be able to assess what's happening at the level of the mind and make some choices and have the power to implement them. And of course, the deeper level of the consciousness, those imprints or the programming, again, the intellect is kind of looking at the indicators and it's ensuring, if something comes from the programming, is it accurate? Yeah, it can assess if the right programming is operating by what's going on at the surface. And then if it's seeing it isn't, it can at least hopefully have the wherewithal to go, you are not on your throne. You have wandered off and you're rolling around in the mud somewhere. That's an expression sometimes we'll use when we slip back into, when we're not soul conscious, it's body conscious. 2 options, makes it simple. I'm either on the throne or I'm off somewhere else. And this is where I function ideally. The other, I can certainly work hard to at least not be a complete disaster. And I've developed some skills in being able to at least look pretty good, but it takes a lot of energy. And things can always go sideways at the drop of a hat. And so hopefully that intellect is able to see the indicators and do something about what programming is operating. And it does that by, if it sees I'm not where I should be, it hopefully is awake to it and has the power to switch the consciousness from the body or the role to the soul. So this is something I need to develop. Just as if I'm sitting and I'm looking at my iPhone and I start to hear a little bit of a from my body, I don't just ignore it or I'm completely oblivious to it, but there's almost a natural checking going on. I cannot let my body stay in the wrong alignment for too long. There's first of all, I hear, I feel what's going on in the body. It's sending me signals and I do something about it. And sometimes I don't even have to put so much attention on what I do because I've practiced it so much that almost, it's become a programming that I can access quite quickly. I need to have that happening for the spiritual being as well. The problem is that we've been so used to kind of looking for external reasons for not being comfortable or for experiencing discomfort or pain or we've almost gotten into the habit of, just allowing wrong thinking to continue to run, that waste thinking to continue to run, that it just becomes this noise in the background. And even though until it becomes really harsh pain, we don't do anything about it. And so, to develop a capacity to recognize that I'm starting to slide off the seat and do something about it right away. These are some of the skills that we need to start to develop if we want to find ourselves living from that elevated position as much as possible. But just as I needed to get help from someone for this body, people that had expertise, that I realized, and it took a long time, it took me, I would say, a good year of pain. And matter of fact, to the point I had to stop dancing because it was so painful. It took me a year to finally admit, okay, I do not know what to do. I do not know what to do. I can't help my body, and get some help. And as soon as I opened myself up to that, all sorts of things came, and they were very interesting because actually a few of them I think were, if you will, the precursor to eventually starting along a spiritual journey. Because so many of them, or so much of it, was about letting go. You know, can I let go of the strategies that I've been using to function and trust spirituality? Trust something that's invisible, that, you know, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that I can't show it to you. I can't show, here I am. But I can, through my practice of meditation, I can experience, you can experience this reality. Make it visible and tangible. And, you know, this is why we have to sit and do this, to develop that faith that will then allow me to fall back on it when I need it, when I'm facing challenges, rather than fall back on my old strategies, which, you know, sometimes the most dangerous is that they do actually work to some degree, but again, at what cost? So I need to get help for the body. I need to get help for me, the being. And once I realized that, it was actually kind of exciting to, you know, okay, so who can help me? And it was interesting because if we think about every other human being on this planet, because it will be someone, and it needs to be another soul. It needs to be a soul that is in a state that I wish to get to. A state where the programming is pristine, there is no acquired programming, where all of those innate capacities are fully and functionally available and are the only qualities through which that being operates. So an elevated quality of consciousness. Now, if every human being is in the same boat as me, and I don't know about you, I mean, yes, there's certainly some we think of as more evolved, you know, there's some extremely, you know, very honorable people out there in the world, but not 24/7. And not just that, but who have a degree of power or can have an impact 24/7 that is pure. And that there's no ulterior motives. That soul wants nothing from any of us other than our well-being. And why is that? Because that soul is the parent of every soul on this planet, every human soul on this planet. And that soul is called the Supreme Soul. And supreme, the word kind of suggests the soul is above everyone else. And perhaps a better way of thinking about it, it's not so much above. I mean, yes, you could say perhaps a quality, but it's beyond. This soul exists constantly beyond the effect of being in a human body in this physical world. Being in a human body in this physical world pulled me away from my spiritual identity over time, maybe over lifetimes. But there's one soul that never becomes a human being. Yeah, and this soul has been given many names, but perhaps the most common is God. And I certainly was not someone who it wasn't even a matter of whether or not I believed in God. I was not looking for God. I was looking for wellness. I wanted to become well. But just as after a year of suffering, I realized I need help. And I was pretty clear about, you know, I mean, I opened myself up to things that I probably would not have pursued before. But I could recognize right away if this person could help me or not. And, you know, even when I first was introduced to Pilates, I recognized the practice as something that would help my body immensely. But I also recognized that the first teacher I had was not necessarily the one who could do that for me. So it's not just spiritual ideas, but a person who is both espousing and is the example or the embodiment of those ideas, those truths, that is necessary. Because, there's a lot of spiritual ideas out there, but it's to have someone who's the example of it that can have such an incredible impact on our capacity to be able to absorb, to imbibe, and to put into practice these spiritual truths, these ideas. And so, how do we connect to a soul who does not become a human being? It's already a challenge enough that I'm invisible to myself. But at least, I can sort of identify that, okay, here's my body, I sit here, whatever. But now, how do I connect? When we connect to another person, at least we can see, okay, they have a body, I can be told what that body looks like and, meet that person. I can interact with that person. But a soul that exists beyond this physical world, how's that possible? Or that is beyond this physical world, but also the effects of it. And so we call this soul the Supreme Soul. And actually in Hindi, the word that's used is Param Atma. Atma means soul, Param means beyond. And it's translated as supreme, but really beyond the pull, beyond the influence, beyond the effect. And therefore resting, holding that pristine state. Perhaps an easier way to think about this is, if I use the analogy of the computer, when a computer has had its files corrupted, when there's a virus in there, first of all, it has to be eradicated, and the corrupted files have to be, if you will, cleaned. And sometimes it has to be wiped, and then the backup drive, And so this soul is like a backup drive. No, we're not going to be wiped. It's not that everything's going to be removed from there. Not at all. That wouldn't be useful. But rather, this is a soul that can help to, and that whose role is to clean, to purify the programming, to return that programming to its pristine state. But unlike a computer in which it is acted on, and it's just very passive in that, I have to be very active in this. I have to choose this at every moment. I have to decide that this is important. And it's to cultivate a relationship with this soul, understanding this soul is my spiritual parent. I said last week, we all have had two parents for this physical body. But that's the parents of the body. The parent of the soul, which is eternal, is clearly not those physical parents. Because I, the soul, existed far beyond when I came into the body and became the child of those physical parents. And so this spiritual parent that we refer to as the Supreme Soul, sometimes known as God, many names, many spiritual traditions, religions out there, this soul has this one purpose and one, if you will, desire, pure desire, but to see us return to our state of health and well-being. And that's the role of this soul. Its ultimate occupation is to give us its care, the love that a parent gives to a child, especially when that child is, if you will, fallen on hard times. And so this ultimate yoga in this practice of Raja Yoga, the yoga or the union, the connection that returns me to that state of royalty, of the ruler, the master over the self-sovereignty, over this inner kingdom, mind, intellect, and imprints or programming, and of course even the sense organs of this body, to use all of those essential capacities for life in the most elevated royal way, benevolent way. That soul, that supreme soul, exists and has been waiting for us to awaken, for a time in which that awakening would be so essential, so necessary. Well, that time has come. It came for me. And, this is what is being offered to all of you. To once again know your spiritual parent. We were separated. We've been separated a very, very long time. And as we moved away, as we separate from that one, we separate from our spirituality. And the result has been, if you will, a less than ideal state of being. And yet, the soul, as it awakens, recognizes, yearns for that connection again, yearns to be in the company of that purity. And so, when I sit myself on this seat, yes, there is that instant immunity. And it's not just, yes, I sit here, I'm not just thinking, but I allow myself, especially as I stay in the subtle energy of that drishti, to reconnect my sense of self with that spiritual identity. And as I reconnect with that spiritual identity, I start to feel the qualities, that personality, and I naturally connect with that ultimate spiritual reality, which connects me to a dimension beyond this spiritual world, the place where all souls reside, when they're not here in the physical world, and where that Supreme Soul resides. And it's a natural, automatic, if you will, result. The immunity I experience from everything that is part of this physical world, even all the programming I've acquired by playing my part in this physical world, I become immune to the effect of those things, but only as long as I sustain this. And then I connect very naturally to a space of light, of sweet silence, kind of like what I am, the being, sweet silence, and that pure presence, that unique soul that is simply there waiting to love me in the most useful way possible. I mean, true love is useful. True love elevates. True love heals. True love empowers. It's not just a wonderful feeling so I can have a good time in that feeling. It does something. There's that Forrest Gump expression, goodness is as goodness does. Well, I always feel love is, true love is as true love does. It does something useful. It's useful, it's meaningful, it's practical. It gives me something that allows me to live my life in a fulfilling way. Ultimate love, no? And so this soul loves me simply by reminding me, by generating, by sharing its presence with me, that amplify and nurture and empower my truth, my spiritual truth, and helps to remove through that truth, becoming more powerful and amplified, remove that acquired programming. If you will, cleanse the soul, purify the soul, bring the soul back into a state of health. This is just spiritual, if you will, a spiritual treatment, health cure. And so I want that yoga. I want to cultivate it. I want to connect, position myself in it as much as I can. Because there's a lot that needs to be cleaned out in here. And the thing is, I will disconnect again and again. I will forget. Life will pull me away. And I must stay in my life. Because life, yes, it will pull me, but it will also provide, if you will, the impetus, the motivation to harness that connection. It will provide the very, if you will, scenarios that will remind me or that will motivate me to connect,
to remember who I am. And often it's the exact, if you will, circumstances that are going to, if you will, inspire. For example, I remember going through a period where, and I mean, this is ongoing. It's not like I'm done, but, I'm very aware, and we've all heard on many paths, you'll hear words like, okay, ego. Got to deal with ego. Ego's the problem. It's that false sense of self that just takes over and, makes me do things that I regret and doesn't allow me to, it makes me say things, think things that, are not helpful. That it's what's creating the fear, it's what's creating an arrogance or a diminishing of self, because ultimately ego has both those sides to it. I'm better than, or I'm not good enough. All of this is coming from that ego. So this is something I think we've all heard of, we all know about, that we need to letting go, all of these ideas and aspects of often what we connect to spirituality. And yet, or I need to be present, we've heard these expressions before. But how do I do that in a meaningful way? How can I have the power? I need power to do those things. I need power to, and if ego, what am I if I'm not ego? I need to know that too. I need to have a very clear sense of what it is I'm trying to position to myself to that is not ego. There's these different aspects that I need. And I need to have some company in this. I need some support in this. Because these things will pull me again and again. And so, as I started to say earlier, I knew, okay, I want to finally finish this ego. I want to address it. Well, guess what? The fact that I've been operating from ego, that's what I've been putting out there. All these wonderful scenarios are now just waiting for me, if you will, the return. Sometimes we say the karmic return are going to put me in situations where I need to now be in a circumstance where the acquired programming would have me do this. But I am now going to meet that scenario or that situation or that individual with spirituality and change the habit, start to shift things. It's so wonderful as a Pilates instructor. The first time when you see a client do an exercise they've done again and again and again with the wrong alignment and the wrong muscles fire and the pain comes back, and to see them for the first time, and for them, they're just over the moon. It's like a miracle when they go to do that exercise again and the right alignment is sustained and the right muscles work. And you know what they always say? Sometimes they'll actually even ask me, am I doing it? Is this it? Because they'll say, it's so easy. It's so easy. They're not even sure if it's actually happening because they don't feel all the struggle and the effort and all of that going on. And so it's such a wonderful victory to stay in my life, to not run away from it like my life is the problem. It created the acquired programming, so let me, as once was done on a spiritual path, you'd go off into the mountains or into a cave and separate yourselves from the enemy, which is life. It's not. I need to stay in my life and trust. Now I have the tools. Now I have this wonderful spiritual capacity. I have yoga. I have yoga with the Supreme Soul to empower me. That now I can go into my life and face these circumstances. And it's such a sweet victory. And maybe I'll just finish with one story before we have our final meditation of the evening. But I was, one day I was at work and there was a client who had a very specific, if you will, desire for herself, which involved working out twice a day, every day. Now this was for a limited period of time, but I mean, perhaps there's some of you out there that do that, but it's pretty extreme to work out twice a day, every day, Yeah, anyway, she had a specific goal in mind. So by the time she had to go through all the instructors in the studio, because one instructor was not enough to fulfill this goal. And so by the time I saw her, it was, I think, maybe later in the week or the beginning of the second week of this whole thing. And her body was a wreck. I mean, she's like, I'm in pain. All I want to do is kind of stretch a bit. It's like, okay, but I'll warm you up first. So we started the session. Anyway, trying to correct her in what she was doing just to warm up, because of this sort of drive and, basically a soul who's being driven by ego, she spent a lot of time trying to do what I was asking, and suddenly there's very little time of the session left, and we haven't even started to stretch. She realizes this and just goes off on me. You have wrecked my session. This is not what I wanted. I wanted to stretch. Just get away from me. And it was so interesting at that moment because, of course, we have this or it's not pure pride, but we have this pride of, I want to, I'm a Pilates instructor and I want to show that I'm fairly good, that a competency, this desire for competency, to express competency is pretty strong, to show I'm good enough. And so when I was criticized in this way, I could feel starting up this reaction. And in my mind, there was a thought of, you go right ahead and do what you want. Sayonara. And as soon as that feeling, that thought, it was just starting to come up. It was like, alarm bells, ding, 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 ding. You are so not on your throne right now. And I realized I was in the ego of, I'm a Pilates instructor with a certain competency, and it's being threatened right now. And instantly, just realizing it, just having even the thought of it, put me on my seat. I don't even remember making any effort. And what was extraordinary, what happened after that, because instantly, it was like going from anger to bliss. And such feelings of compassion for this person. And I was not making any effort for this. It was just the natural product of getting on my throne. Feelings of compassion. But what was interesting, I didn't know what to do at that moment. It wasn't clear. No idea of, how do I manage this now? Just there was, and I was fine. I think the biggest thing is I now am okay. I'm in a healthy, functional place. That person had gone over and started to stretch. And it was clear that the way they were stretching, they were going to hurt themselves. And I'm just sort of standing there going, okay, what do I do now? I didn't even really think that. It's just that there was no plan. There was no thinking of what I'm going to do. But I suddenly found myself walking over to her, my mouth opened, and out of it came, stop what you're doing, you're going to hurt yourself, go over there, lie down, I will stretch you. And it came out boom, boom, boom like that. And it was fascinating because I'm observing all of this because I'm not planning any of it out. It is just a natural functioning of this clarity of this authentic state. And it came out, but with the these feelings, there was no irritation, no anger, but it was very strong. And it was so accurate for that soul. It was the authority, which I think is the only thing she recognizes, but at the same time, these very caring vibrations that I was not speaking from. I think if I'd gone over there and been very like, I'm so sorry and everything else, it would have gone sideways. But anyway, the session went on and she was completely, transformed, if you will. I shouldn't say transformed because I'm sure she went right back perhaps later on to whatever. But the impact on that soul for that brief time was such that she got to experience herself closer to her spirituality. And for me, it was a wonderful indicator. Imagine thinking, well, I have to remove myself from Pilates, I have to remove myself from anything that might pull me into ego or whatever, rather than, no, let me stay in what might push that ego button. But be doing my practice every day so that when those moments come, I'm ready. So let's finish with a practice right now. I will actually, before we go into it, because I'd like to leave you in that state as we go, so I'll just say thank you for joining. There's a little information that will show on the screen at the end of the meditation for you, so that if you'd like to contribute to future activities here, you can, or if you'd like to communicate with us, or if you'd like to observe other activities either through our Facebook or on the channel you're on right now, YouTube, all of those things will be made available to you. So it's been a pleasure, and let's conclude with a final practice of that essential seat and that essential connection. And so I take a moment just to position my body, if it's moved away from its ideal, shoulder blades, imaginary strings, activation, liberation, and then release the feet. Observe the breath. Gently moving in the rib cage. And then the attention in that energy of the observer, in the drishti, becoming centered, concentrated in the being, the one seated on the throne of the forehead. And as I hold my awareness, my attention in that subtle energy of seeing, of consciousness, sweet silence, freedom, a lightness of being, a luminous state of being. Invoking those qualities, the pure essence of my nature, as I am immune now to all that has been acquired. My true nature revealing itself to me, becoming present to it, at peace, purity, love, power, truth, bliss, balance, a deep contentment, fulfilling state of being. Quality of the energy that I am and that I radiate, amplifying the light shining from me, a light that fills the space of my mind and connects me to a dimension beyond. To that spiritual reality in which that pure presence, that ever pure soul is waiting for me, as always, always been waiting for me, for this moment of meeting yoga. And allowing that one's presence into my mind, into my heart, those pure vibrations. Doing their work. Showing me who and what I truly am. Freeing me from all that is not me. But it is a process that will take time, that I must return to again and again. The heart recognizing true love, that ultimate benefit, in which all desires of the heart will be fulfilled. All those true desires for the self and for my world. For as I change, as I am uplifted and transformed in the light of God, in His love, the world changes. From the inside out. I am a soul, a child of the Supreme Soul, a being of peace. Om Shanti. Thank you.